so dismissive. The one who was like, oh, she's probably with friends, and didn't want to initially take the report. And so obviously they're like, okay, well, now knowing what we do, it's kind of weird he didn't want to do anything about it. But Officer Owens was kind of in the exact same position. He also been with the department for about 3 years, and he too had kind of like a sketchy, suspicious connection to the case. Because when Sonia's sister and brother-in-law came to put up her photo in the department, he had been the officer that was pissed about it. He was the one yelling at them to take it down and freaking out. And so both of them were questionable, so both of them were asked to fly into Anchorage to the ABI headquarters to formally question and polygraph. But before that could even happen, literally the day before, something even crazier went down. So it was late on the night of September 24, 2003, when a call came in over the Nome Police Department radio that changed everything. An officer reported that one of the department's patrol cars, Unit 321, had been stolen from outside the station. And so officers were reaching out to everyone with the department, seeing if they had taken it, but ultimately, no one claimed to have had the SUV. So obviously, because that meant someone random had a police vehicle, an intense search began right away. And so several officers went out to try to find this missing vehicle, and then finally, at 2 a.m., a frantic call came in from none other than Officer Owens, one of those two officers that were working the night that Sonia went missing. Now, he claimed that he had found the expedition near a gravel pit on the outskirts of town. And I'm sure you're thinking, why does that sound familiar? Literally, it was the same one near the location where Sonia was found, like just down the road. And so they get this call, like, okay, at least we found it. But then 2 minutes later, Owens radio dispatch again, and this time he was freaking out, okay? He is screaming, saying that he approached the vehicle, shots have been fired. I mean, he's literally saying he's in the middle of a shootout. It is utter chaos, and he asks for backup right away. Now, backup officers rush out to the scene, and when they arrive, they end up finding Owens, like, climbing out of the gravel pit as if he had been hiding, and the missing patrol unit sat there, riddled with bullet holes. It had shattered windows. It looked like someone had maybe smashed one of the windows out with a rock. Owens appeared rattled, but he was unhurt, and almost immediately he started saying he got scared. He started saying that he was having this epiphany, that maybe police work wasn't for him, he was not cut out for this, he was thinking about his 4-year-old son, all of this was too dangerous. I mean, he literally had worked for several years with this police department. I don't know how long he had been in law enforcement just in general, but like, all of a sudden, this one day before he's supposed to fly out to Anchorage to be polygraphed by the ABI, he all of a sudden is in the midst of a shootout. He finds this missing car and says, oh, well, I guess I just don't want to be a cop anymore. Never mind. But that's not even the craziest part of the scene. What ended up being the craziest part of all of this is what was found inside of the patrol vehicle. Under all that broken glass, there was an envelope. And inside the envelope was a letter. I'm not going to read the entirety of the letter. You can find it online, but a portion of it read, quote, pigs. I hate cops. I hate every one of you. Sonia was just a person in the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't know her. As you can see, it was easy for me to take your pig car keys right there. It's not her fault. She thought I was okay, and shit just happened. Every one of you should be more careful. I watch every move you make. You leave me alone, and I'll leave you alone. I will also shoot you in the head if you get close. It's just this taunting tone, violent tone, claiming responsibility for Sonia's murder, and basically threatening further attacks on the police if they continue to try to find out who was behind it. And it seemed like they just wanted to show how easy it was to take the police car, and it almost seemed like they were claiming that's exactly what they did the first time, and that's what actually picked up Sonia when she was murdered. But at this point, I don't think it had been released publicly that was a police car that was last seen with her. And so how would the person responsible have known that that information was out there and what was being actively looked into at that point in time? So you can see from the get-go, there were like these red flags going up that something about this still is just not making any sense. And the snow had been placed right there on the front seat as if it were meant to be found immediately. And then the most chilling discovery, Sonia Ivanov's missing identification card was also found in an envelope. So whoever happened in this car had to have been tied to the murder. But at this point, authorities were really questioning everything. You know, they believed it was one of their own at this point, and they were even about to send 2 people down to Anchorage to be questioned in regards to the murder of Sonia. But this also was showing, if this letter was being truthful, that maybe it wasn't really that simple. Maybe they were being framed. ABI began digging deeper and found that the patrol cars for the department were not well secured at all. They were frequently left outside the building, sometimes unlocked, I think even most of the time unlocked, with the keys inside. So really, at the right time, anyone could take one if they wanted to and just drive off with it. And because there were so few people at that department, maybe someone would notice right away. Maybe they wouldn't notice at all if it was in the middle of the night, like when Sonia was taken. And despite them believing that it was someone from law enforcement behind this, maybe just like with Courtknee, despite things seeming to add up and point one way, it was all explainable and just a crazy coincidence. But those same red flags that I just spoke about just kept on bothering a lot of people looking into it. And as the investigators continued to process the scene of the shootout, the more troubling it became, because there were no shell casings, there were no footprints, and no evidence that anyone other than Owens had been there. So had this person decided to pull over here, get in a shootout with Owens, and afterward they somehow made no shoe impressions at all as they walked around to take the time to collect all of the casings, and then they ran? I mean, super doubtful here, okay? Nome's not a big place, so when he called for backup, I can only imagine it arrived very quickly. So the idea that all that happened, first of all, just doesn't seem reasonable for someone to do in that situation, but also time-wise, just doesn't seem right. And not just that, but the car's position off the road didn't align with the story of an active pursuit or shootout either. It's not like someone frantically pulled to the side when they realized that police were following them. This car was neatly parked. Owens also said that he saw the taillights of the car, and that's how he noticed it to begin with. But again, for someone to have the taillights on, that means their foot is on the brake. But then somehow, in less than a minute, that person goes from braking to parking, turned the car off, and then according to Owens, ran into the trunk, pulled out a rifle, and then began shooting. Time-wise, it just doesn't seem very logical. So forensic techniques also show they tested for fingerprints. They ran DNA testing on the letter and the patrol car interior, but no usable prints or DNA were recovered from the note. It was really frustrating because this seemed to be lining up exactly with Sonia's murder, where nothing at all usable was left behind. So again, is it someone that just knows how to get rid of all of that really easily, or is it law enforcement that was really bouncing back and forth? Inside the own police department, suspicion just continued to spread. Gunfire, the murder, that ID, nothing was making sense. No one knew who they could trust. So the day after that incident, Officer Piscoya did end up going to Anchorage to be interviewed and have a polygraph test with the ABI. But Owens, due to the trauma from the shootout, said that he could not go because he needed to stay behind and go to therapy. And so he ended up getting out of going down there to be questioned, at least on that day. So Piscoya was the first to be spoken to by ABI. Now, he ended up telling them that it was a busy shift the night that Sonia went missing. He said that he was out on calls a lot, and he said that one of his last calls, he and Owens actually went together to respond to a domestic violence complaint. And I guess when they got there, it turned ugly. There ended up being an altercation. I think that Owens got hit, and so basically they ended up arresting this man and taking him to jail. And Piscoya claimed that he, after this, stayed behind at the department to fill out all of the paperwork. He was supposed to be off the shift, so he had things he needed to tie up. And Owens went back out on patrol. Piscoya said he didn't go back out on patrol again, and all of this happened by like 12:30, maybe 1 at the latest. Meaning that during the time frame Sonia went missing, Owens was the only known police officer out and about in his patrol car. To this point, Piscoya said he was at the police department by himself, and he remained there until his shift ended at I think around 3. Now, when Owens ended up coming in about a week later for his round of questioning and polygraph, he corroborated most of the story that Piscoya said. He spoke about the domestic violence call and how he went on patrol afterwards. He said that he was out patrolling when bars were closing at around 1:30 to 2, and this is something he said he routinely did. He would go up and down around that area to check for things like drunk driving and people that may needed some help or were getting calls now that doors were closed. And so he claimed that's where he was that entire time. And then at around 3, he went back to the apartment to drive Piscoya home. And now authorities are looking at this timeline that they've been given around the time zone went missing. And Piscoya is claiming he was at the apartment alone, and Owens is claiming he was out patrolling alone. And so they're like, okay, well, one of them is lying. Like, something's going on here. But both of them claim that there was no one else to verify their whereabouts at all. Like, they literally was each on their own. So Chloe went home at 3 a.m., but Owens was still on shift. I don't know if someone else came on shift to replace this Chloe, or if at this point he was the only person on shift for the next few hours. But he said that after he dropped Chloe off, he headed back to the police station to do paperwork. This would be sometime after 3 a.m. And he said that the moment he walked in the door to the department, he ended up hearing a gunshot somewhere in the distance. And so it seemed almost like he was indicating he may have even heard the gunshot that killed Sonia. And so he claimed after hearing that, he immediately got back in his patrol vehicle and went out to look for where the shot came from. But after an hour of driving around aimlessly, he ultimately found nothing. And so he ended up being sent on one more call, he did some paperwork, and then at 7 a.m. he picked up the sergeant to swap cars and headed home for himself. Now, when ABI cross-checked his statements with dispatch logs, his story really began to unravel. There were unexplained gaps in his patrol record, long stretches of time his location could not be verified by radio contact or vehicle logs. Not just that, but they were getting feedback from investigators back in Nome that supported the questionability of Owens and his behavior. He had a history in the department, apparently, of not following the rules. Specifically, he seemed to love the night shift, likely because of certain things that he could get away with when everything was dark, the town was quiet, and there were few officers on shift. Apparently, Owens loved to bring along friends for unauthorized ride-alongs in those early morning and nighttime hours. And if it wasn't friends that he had with him, he was allegedly picking up women that were walking along those streets, which is definitely something that's suspicious given that Sonia was picked up by a police officer, and Owens, one of the only two on shift that night, had a history of picking up women walking around now. And so authorities started to try to identify several of the women that he allegedly picked up just to kind of try to figure out what was going on. And I guess the ones that they did identify claimed everything was consensual, but they all described something that seemed really familiar. They said that Owens would slowly follow behind them for a bit and eventually would pull ahead of them walking their way. And so they have no choice but to really come up to the officer's window and talk to him. And I guess he would sweet talk them, and they all claimed he would invite them in his car, and they would ultimately have sex. I don't know if it was known by the department that Owens was picking women for sex on duty in the middle of the night, but it was known that he was bringing these friends for unauthorized ride-alongs. So I guess it was repeatedly told to stop doing that, but he never did because, again, he did not want to follow the rules. So it was out of the realm of possibilities. Maybe while he was patrolling that night, he stumbled across Sonia, and they ended up finding out that Owens very quickly knew Sonia, and it actually searched her up in the department computers, which is very creepy behavior. She worked the night shift at the hospital, and so if anyone was brought in by officers that worked the night shift, like Owens, she would be the first face that they would see. She would help admit everyone. So maybe that's how he figured out who she was to begin with and had some bizarre something. And Owens did end up admitting that he knew who she was, but he's like, I don't personally know her, I've just seen her around, and he claimed that he had never picked her up before. He also had searched for her in the database, but only to verify her age after seeing her at local bars. Not because he saw her and had some weird, curious interest in my life. And he also completely denied picking up any women at all while in his patrol car or even his personal vehicle. He said it was absolutely ridiculous. He had never done it, despite speaking to all these women who claimed that he absolutely had. But the odd behavior they uncovered just deepened. Investigators also decided to speak to his soon-to-be ex-wife. Apparently, during all of this, he was going through a rough divorce. There was a nasty custody battle that was going on, and he'd been kicked out of the house and was renting a room from a family friend. And so his soon-to-be ex-wife ended up telling authorities bombshell information. She claimed that on August 12th, and because it's Owen's birthday, he ended up giving her a frantic call. She was at work about to get off, so it was around 4:30 p.m., and he claimed that he needed to drop their son off early because he had been called into work early. And he specifically told her that there was a missing girl and, quote, wasn't looking good. And so I'm sure you're wondering, why did this alarm investigators? This call, like I said, according to his wife, happened at 4:30. Sonia was not reported missing that day until after 5. And so why would he say that? How would he know that information if no one had reported her as missing yet? I personally have my questions about that, because how could he have known someone was about to report her as missing? Like, why would he draw attention to there being a missing girl and it wasn't looking good if he didn't even know if she would ever be reported missing, let alone like 30 minutes to an hour?
That is so sad to think that an officer, the people supposed to protect you,
but regardless,
might be the one who
Owens
murdered her.
took a polygraph test. Sawyer passed it. Owens did not. Now, investigators began to focus on Owens more closely. Forensics teams searched his home and vehicles, looking for any trace of evidence that could connect him to Sonia's murder. And a tip ended up coming in that led them to a hunting camp about 70 miles away, where someone claimed to have seen Officer Owens burning what looked like a brand new pair of gloves in the fire pit. And they're like, why would he buy this really nice, expensive-looking brand new pair of gloves? And then, hearing all the information that was coming out, they're like, you know what, there might be something sketchy about this. And so authorities decided to go out to the camp, and they began sifting through the burned pile. And it didn't take them long to find something. It was an eyelet for shoelaces, specifically for Skechers. The same kind of shoes that Sonia had been wearing the night that she went missing. And so right away, the entire burn pit was moved to Nome, where they continued sifting from there. They ended up finding several more eyelets from the Skechers shoes. They also found a metal bra, and they found a metal pant button with brand Tilt on it. And when they went to speak to Sonia's family to ask about some of the brands of jeans she wore, one of the main brands she wore was Tilt. So it started to become clear that all these missing clothes and shoes from Sonia likely had been burned in this pit. But all this was still very circumstantial because they couldn't prove that for a fact, and even though Owens went to hunt at this hunting camp, they also couldn't directly tie it to him, and then ended up finding a key. And this burned key was to a post office box belonging to Owens' uncle. And so at this point, they're like, okay, we're getting closer. We've got to see if we can find this casing. So they went back out to the area where Sonia was found, and they meticulously searched through all the brush, all the dirt, and they ended up finding a 22 casing, matching the caliber of gun that had shot Sonia. However, the still didn't directly connect to Officer Owens. His issue weapon was not a 22. And I'm unsure if they knew of all of his firearms that he had at home, not only being someone in law enforcement, also in Alaska. I guarantee you his issue weapon was not the only gun that he had. And most people, if they go hunting, are going to have a rifle. And so to me, it seems like that would be like the first step of where they would check next. Because even if it didn't match his issue weapon, who's to say it didn't bring
Is that girl Maya who ripped people off
while he was on duty? But instead, Officer
Good morning, Jess.
that day shift officer assigned to Sonia's case made a suggestion. And he was like, you know what? I think you should look at the evidence room at the police department. Maybe someone took a gun from there.
Good morning, Jess. I love you. I hope you have a good day.
Investigators found that the key to that evidence room in the Nome Police Department was about as secure as the patrol cars. The key to that evidence room was in the sergeant's open mailbox for anyone to grab. Okay, and so they're like, all right, well that means that literally anyone in the department have access to it. And so there was no way to know for sure who went in and out.
Hi, Michelle. How are you?
Like you would typically have in large departments. And so they're like, you know what, we're going to start going through all of the guns, and they eventually found a Jennings 22, and they sent the casing in for testing, and they've been given a list of guns back that particular casing could come from, and Jennings 22 was one of those weapons on the list. And so they're like, you know what, this might be it. We're going to send it off for testing. And when investigators spoke to a woman that he was seeing during this time, she ended up telling them that Owens had been speaking to her about getting out of Alaska. He's like, hey, you want to just like get out of here with me? Let's move completely out of the state. It seemed like he was going to run, and they were not about to let him do that. So on October 25th, 2003, despite a mostly circumstantial case, Matthew Owens was arrested for the murder of Sonia Ivanov. The news spread across Nome almost instantly. For many, it felt impossible to believe that one of their own officers could have been responsible. For others, especially the Alaskan Native women, but
Sure, your hair's gonna look amazing today.
this was not shocking at all. All it was confirmation of what they dealt with and feared and endured for years at this point. And after his arrest, even more evidence of the poor treatment of Native women piled up. When authorities went and found some of the women that he allegedly invited into his car previous to his arrest, all of them had claimed things were consensual. But now that he was arrested, ones claiming that it wasn't consensual finally felt safe to come forward. Some of these women claimed that they had been arrested for something, and
okay, babe, I will.
took them in.
Or you call me.
He
I'll answer.
assaulted them.
You call
Some of
me.
the women also said that they had just been simply walking in Nome, and they were lured by Owens, offering a safe ride home, only to be assaulted. And he told several of them that threatened to tell on him that nobody would believe a drunk Alaskan Native woman. And unfortunately, he was right, because several of them did try to go and report all of what happened to them, and that Owens was a monster, and they were completely ignored and dismissed. And had someone actually done something about this and believed these women, or at least looked into it, it could have prevented Sonia's murder. And at the very least, it could have connected Owens to her murder a lot faster. Now, when the case finally went to trial, Nome was obviously still reeling. It was a really tough situation when you have such a tight-knit community to find out something like that. Something that was supposed to protect you, feeling that maybe that police department was instead protecting one of their own instead of the people they were literally hired to protect. That's a lot to grapple with. But everyone was happy that this trial was finally starting and going to be over, hopefully ending in justice and answers. Now, the prosecution brought forward over 70 witnesses, and they presented a pretty ridiculous timeline showing Owens'
Thank you for the heart, Regina.
August 10th at 11th of 2003, aligning with the window of Sonia's disappearance. They called for witnesses, including Florence, who had seen Sonia into the police SUV. They also outlined the similarities between Owens' signed vehicle and the vehicle described. There was no confusing them. The fact that decal for Nome Department was there, the fact that she reported this within just a few days, and the fact that it had been ignored. They also introduced his history of bringing women into his car. The forensic evidence was also introduced, but unfortunately, it just wasn't really strong. They had the casing, they had the burned items, they had the litter and patrol car. They were all these things so loosely connecting Owens to the crime, but still a lot of it was circumstantial. They could never formally prove that gun that was found in the police department evidence locker was actually the one that was used. Prosecutors argued that Owens had staged that patrol car theft just the day before he was supposed to be interviewed to divert suspicion. He was trying to create this boogeyman, this ghost killer that authorities would spend years chasing. It's just like the bushy-haired man
Okay, love you.
a lot of suspects use
Very
to
soon.
throw off an investigation. Let's go find this bushy-haired man that was actually behind these attacks when really it was just this creative person to have authorities searching for someone that doesn't exist. Same concept, just with a cop-hating maniac that was apparently on the loose. And this was meant to be his shield, a way to hide behind the authorities' badge and the chaos that he himself had created. And it did work like momentarily, but thankfully a lot of people saw right through it. Prosecutors also highlighted how the killer showed what they called evidence awareness, kind of precision that comes from someone trained in law enforcement, like not your average person would know all of the things to successfully get that much evidence to disappear. They also reminded jurors that Sonia's clothing and belongings had been removed, that shell casings were missing, the place of her body, all of it suggested an intentional effort to eliminate forensic traces. And so many of those things were found at a hunting camp that Owens known we're going to. Their closing arguments, they told the jury that this was not a random attack, but it was a calculated act of someone who knew exactly how to cover their tracks. This was, as one prosecutor described it, quote, a crime committed by someone who knew every step police would take before they took it. Now, the defense countered back pretty strong. They went right against the prosecution's narrative by arguing that the investigation had been fueled more by public outrage than conclusive proof. They pointed out that there was no definitive DNA profile or fingerprint evidence or anything tied Owens directly to the murder scene, which technically is true. They also emphasized that multiple officers and staff had access to known police department vehicles and equipment, meaning that someone else could have easily used or tampered with the patrol SUV. The witness the defense also pointed out that the gun used couldn't even be conclusively determined to be tied to Owens. They even brought forward a witness that claimed they had seen someone that looked like Sonia racing past them in a blue truck on Monday, which was after she was thought to have been missing. And this would indicate she was alive and well after Owens had that shift that night, that maybe all of this timeline was off. But even this witness, while he said that he saw someone who believed looked like Sonia rush past him that Monday, he couldn't say.
I wonder if the Officer Owens murder trial is.
Owens himself also stand and claimed that he had nothing to do with Sonia's murder. He said that he could explain
if it was recorded. If it was, would y'all like to listen to it? I think that's something I want to listen to.
He said that she had her dates mixed up and that he never spoke to her on the 12th. They actually spoke to her a week later about a missing girl. However, that doesn't make sense either, because at that point, Sonia had already been found. She was no longer a missing girl. So why, a week after she was discovered, would he call his wife and say that there was a missing girl and it wasn't looking good? Like, it was already all over the news. It was a known thing at this point. She was no longer missing. So I just don't trust a word of what he said there. Owens' uncle also was called up to testify because the key was found in that fire pit. But his uncle said that he never gave Owens a key to his mailbox, so he had no idea how that key ended up at the hunting camp. At Owens' frequented. I mean, it's easy to put two and two together, but again, there's no absolute connection there. Now, the defense also questioned the credibility of witnesses the prosecution brought and highlighted inconsistencies in the investigation itself, suggesting that law enforcement had really latched on to Owens because he fit the narrative that the public was demanding. And they even raised concerns about venue bias, arguing that such a small community, nearly everyone knew Sonia or someone connected to the department, making a fair trial almost impossible. And in the end, they really just portrayed Owens as the easiest person to blame when town wanted someone to enjoy your coffee. And again, I have such a problem with that, because if you look historically at situations like this where police departments need some sort of scapegoat, they're probably not going to go after a law enforcement officer, more likely going to go after some random person who's homeless or struggles with drug addiction or, is an Alaskan native that they can pin this all on, that has no money for the lawyer, no way to defend themselves, who doesn't even remember what they were doing a week ago. Like, that's the kind of person they're typically going to try to pin it on, not police officers. So that was a very interesting, choice to make. And not only that, but they also pointed out someone else they believe should have been looked into further. Officer Redburn, according to Owens' defense, had it out for Owens. Owens apparently reported Officer Redburn for hitting a suspect, I guess, during one of their arrests or something along those lines. And so Redburn got in trouble. But not just that, Redburn had also been the officer that was working that day shift investigating the case. There were two officers that were assigned to her case when all the other officers were called off, and Redburn was the one that was supposed to be mainly working it. He was the one not sharing information with night shift or pretty much anyone else, which made it likely that he also was the one that got that tip from Florence Haybros and chose, for whatever reason, to ignore it. He also was the one to suggest authorities check in the evidence locker to see if there was a 22 in there that could have been used. And finally, Owens was also having an affair with Redburn's daughter. And so there's just all of these little things that I can see why they pointed him out as someone that probably wasn't looked into. I mean, why did he ignore that information from Florida. I also thought it was so strange that when the most logical route would be to go and see if Owens had any 22s, that Red immediately stepped up and was like, no, check the evidence locker. Like, why would you do that? I just have lots of questions at the end of this that I'm not feeling very comfortable about. So really, if you look at this case, I wasn't sure what the outcome was going to be because, I mean, even with most cases where a lot of circumstantial evidence is what they're relying on, you have a hard time seeing a jury come to any sort of conclusion. And then when you have the defense bring forward a lot of questions that I feel like most people with common sense would have, and they've not been answered, I can see how there would be problems. And so, sure enough, like I kind of assumed was going to happen, by the end of this trial, the jury came back deadlocked. It was a mistrial. So he would have to have a whole other trial. They would have to do this all over again. And I hate seeing that because of the victims' families. It's hard enough for all these families to sit through these trials to begin with. Sitting through it twice, I mean, and it doesn't end there. I talk about this all the time. You've got the trial for these families of these victims, which these families are victims as well. They have to sit through these trials. They might have to sit through a second trial, and then after that, they have to sit through appeals processes and all of these things and keep fighting for justice. Like, it feels so fragile the entire time. It's never something that the families are able to just put down and say, it's done. I don't have to worry about this anymore. I can heal and move on. And so it makes me so angry that her family had to sit through a second trial. Now, Owen's attorney ended up fighting for a change of venue and citing fairness to the trial, which was already brought up in the first trial. And it was agreed upon. I don't think it's a bad thing. I definitely think they never should have had it. No, I'm kind of surprised they even had the first one there. But when this new trial began, less than a year later, it was, I can't remember what the town was called. I mean, it was a fight away from them. So it wasn't like a super easy town over situation. So it was fresh eyes, a whole new community, a whole new jury panel. But the prosecution and the defense seemed to bring forward the exact same points. No one really changed anything. And so it was really interesting to kind of see, what's going to end up happening with that. Are people going to come to the same conclusion, or are they going to find something different? But interestingly, in the middle of this trial, there was a huge breakthrough, at least what the prosecution thought would be a huge breakthrough. Now, that officer that worked night shift, Officer Wavana, who was one of the two officers that was assigned to Sonia's case, said that he was speaking to one of his neighbors during the second trial about the case, because he had worked on it, and the neighbor was like, oh, well, have you ever heard anything about XYZ? And it was just this, damning piece of information. The Officer Wavana is like, wait a minute, what? So apparently, this neighbor had spoken with the woman that was the family friend Owens was staying with at the time of the murder. So technically, his landlord, but she had been known by him for a very long time. And she had apparently confided into this neighbor that she saw Sonia's ID and wallet in Owens' room, and it freaked her out. None of that information had ever made its way to investigators. This woman that was a family friend of Owens never brought it forward. The neighbor never brought it forward. It was never introduced at the first trial, but that would be a pretty huge connection because whoever killed Sonia was the one who had her ID. They were also the one behind the theft of the patrol vehicle, and so that would be a huge connecting piece, which would be huge for this case because so far they hadn't really had anything. And so at this point, they're like, you know what, being a family friend, they were worried she might lie for him. So authorities decided they were going to get a warrant to have this neighbor call her, and they were going to record the phone call. The neighbor called and started talking to her and brought up the fact that she saw the ID and wallet belonging to Sonia in Owen's room. And she didn't deny seeing it, but she also didn't say for sure that she did. Instead, she kind of seemed to beat around the bush by saying, oh, well, I don't remember that, but I think I missaw or misspoke because the news said it was found. She just said, oh, well, the news said it was found, so basically there's no way she could have seen that. But it was not a solid yes or no answer. And so once they had that, they decided to call her to the stand. And so she was on stand, she was asked about this, and she ended up fully denying everything. She straight up said no. She had never seen any of those items in Owen's room, and she had never told anyone that she saw those items. But they were also able to play this recording where she spoke to the person that she told that, and she didn't deny it then. So it was interesting interesting that things had changed from then to now when she was testifying. And I think that really kind of said a lot to the jury. Now, the prosecution at this point ended up arguing that Owens essentially did what he had already with so many other women. Maybe he had seen Sonia in the bar when he patrolled at night and set his sights on her, looked her up in the system to figure out where she lived. Maybe he wanted to patrol those areas in case she was on a walk. And they believe that he ended up stumbling across her and saw an opportunity. So he stopped and offered her a ride. And being a familiar face and someone that she probably thought she could trust, she agreed. But Owens likely made sexual advances, like he had with so many other women who got into his patrol vehicle, and that turned the situation very dangerous. Everyone that knew Sonia said she was outspoken, she was fiery, and she likely said, hell no. And she probably freaked out, threatened to turn him in. She played no games, and more than likely, she felt like a potential threat to Owens. She was strong, almost 6 feet tall, young, and brave, and likely dismissed him. So instead of mocking her like he had so many others, and risking someone believing her if she turned him in, maybe he felt irritated and angry and decided to just silence her permanently. Now, another one of my questions that is just something in the back of my mind that I kept thinking about is I'm not sure if they believe he just kept that evidence gun from the evidence room with him when he claimed to pick up women in case it went bad, but maybe he every shit went in and grabbed it and took it out with him, or maybe this is somehow premeditated. I guess they didn't really focus much on that because they never confirmed that was the gun used. Either way, they believe that's what happened, and he killed Sonia and did his damnedest to try to cover it up. After weeks of testimony in the second trial, the jury finally reached a verdict, and I was like on the edge of my seat, like what's going to happen? Is this going to be another mistrial? Because even that huge piece of evidence that was hearsay, could have connected him to the ID, but that just didn't work out. Is it just going to be another jury? But ultimately, that's not what happened. This jury found Owens guilty of first-degree murder and evidence tampering, and ultimately, he was sentenced to 101 years in prison. Owens, even after that, continued to maintain his innocence. He hasn't really spoken publicly himself, or even much to his lawyers, but I do believe his brother has said something for him directly after his conviction, basically saying he's innocent, that he was framed the whole nine that Owens had been saying the entire time. So nothing different really than what Owens and his attorneys had been saying.
I gotta go to my front door.
His initial appeal was denied in 2010, and his petition for post-conviction relief was rejected again in 2021, and I could not find any other current appeals in motion at this point. So as far as I know, he remains incarcerated in Alaska, and maybe he's considering appealing again, but I think he knows it's not going to go his way. Now, Sonia's murder didn't just lead to conviction, it ended up changing the law. In 2007, Alaska enacted the Sonia Ivanov Act, which established a mandatory 99-year minimum sentence for any peace officer convicted of first-degree murder committed while on duty. Honestly, it should be on duty and off duty, but whatever. And law is a direct response to her case, a statement that authority does not place anyone above accountability. Lawmakers, advocates, and Sonia's family pushed for this legislation together. They wanted to make sure that what happened in Nome couldn't happen again anywhere else in at least Alaska. That no department could just ignore these red flags or delay justice the way Nome police had in those early days. The witness statement describing Sonia entering a marked police SUV that sat untouched for weeks that was so unbelievable. And some officers apparently resisted outside help, unwilling to consider that one of their own could be involved. It doesn't seem like anyone outright knew who exactly was involved, but there are several things that had occurred during the time of the investigation before Owens was arrested, where it seemed like no one wanted anyone else to find out. Like they were willing to protect their own, whether that was through denial or possibly misplaced loyalty. Either way, there's valuable time. And for me in the community, especially Alaska Native women, that is a pretty damn big deal. Sonia Ivanov Act stands today as both a safeguard and promise that authority without accountability has absolutely no place in justice, and that trust, once broken, can only be rebuilt through transparency and action. Now, the Nome Police Department also ended up moving to a new building, and they claim to have a whole new department from the ground up, so that things like this can't happen again.
I am so good.
The explicit aim of preventing recurrence of past issues and hopefully ensuring a fresh start. And I only hope that they've stuck with that, because during the internal investigation, the small town of Nome, with only a few thousand residents, was found to have over 400 open sexual assault cases. So clearly, so much was being dismissed in this small town, so much was being brushed under the rug, and that's likely exactly what led to Owens feeling bold enough and safe enough within those walls to do exactly what he did, and then to escalate to murder. When you look back on Sonia's story, I feel like it's impossible not to think about everything that she had ahead of her, or at least should have had ahead of her. She should have gone to college. She should have come home to visit her family and tell them about her plans. She should have been able to walk barefoot on the beaches, soaking up the warmth that she had been dreaming about and pushing toward. She should have grown older, surrounded by friends who love her. And instead, all of that was stolen overnight. Her family lost a daughter, a sister, a friend. No, lost a bright young woman who wanted nothing more than to just build a simple life for herself. Sonia's story, thankfully, doesn't end with her murder. Her legacy isn't a tragedy, but it's in the change that followed, and that is my favorite kind of case to cover. Because these stories are tragic, they are awful, but they're also a reality that likely is never ever going to go away. And so the only way I feel like these families and communities can take control back if I turn these tragedies into something that will help others, because that's something that these criminals are never going to be able to touch. So on that note, you guys, I'm going to go ahead and go. I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to Sonia's story.
Hi, Mama.
If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe button down below to become a part of the Helen fam, so we can hopefully bring them home together or bring them just together. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.
All right. Do you want to hear another true crime case, or do you want to listen to court? Let's see what the next true crime case is. I'll see if y'all are interested in it. Okay. Sorry, I get all that primer off my hands. So, we have videos. We'll go to her most popular videos. With Kayla Bali. Let's see. She doesn't give descriptions of what it's about. Does that make sense? Am I making sense? This primer's got to try. Okay. We can go to Amazon Music, and see if any of the podcasts that I follow have any new episodes. Huh. Dead certain. Let's see if it's out. Okay. There's only one episode. We're going to listen to it.
On Deck is built to back small businesses.
Most furniture and decor are
Visit for sale sign on neighbors and make you think something. It's possible that it's coming to the Civic Center. What do you know? But before we begin this fashion expression, my dad often used it to.
There we go. Hi, Tasha.
What do you know? It's kind of an old-fashioned expression. My dad often used it to express mild surprise. Oh, look, there's a for sale sign at the neighbor's house. What do you know? Neil Diamond's going to the Civic Center. What do you know? But before we begin this story, I want you to treat it as a serious question. What do you know? I mean, really know. Is it possible that what you say you know is actually an opinion, something you just think?
Hi, Leslie.
And if you think something, what various forces worked on you to make you think that way? And were those forces so effective in making you think something that somewhere along the way you started believing that you could just think it? You knew it? In 1975, a 15-year-old girl named Martha Moxley was murdered in Greenwich, Connecticut. She was rich and beautiful and loved by all who knew her. For decades, despite intense media scrutiny and the tragic murder in the wealthy, supposedly safe community, police failed to make an arrest. Until the year 2000, when they took Martha's one-time neighbor, Michael Skakel, into custody.
Live, love, life.
He was 39 years old. Back in 1975, he'd been 15, just like Martha. He was wealthy, like her. He was also a cousin of the Kennedys. The media responded in predictable fashion.
Kennedy nephew Michael Skakel, now 39, charged with murdering his Greenwich, Connecticut neighbor Martha Moxley, the late Robert Kennedy.
Teenage neighbor and friend of Martha Moxley related to the Kennedy name has lent this case tremendous notoriety.
Unlike a lot of people, I have an appetite for lurid news, a good murder story, especially one involving famous names. I watched the news, I read the articles.
Kelly Lynn.
Of course, Michael Skakel killed his next-door neighbor Martha Moxley. He beat her to death with a golf club on October 30th, 1975, when they were both 15. I knew it.
I'm going to listen to something else. I've already heard this one.
You knew it, too.
The
In
case.
2002, a jury convicted Skakel, and the judge threw the book out.
It was nearly the maximum sentence possible, 20 years of life for Kennedy nephew Michael Skakel, convicted of killing his Greenwich, Connecticut neighbor Martha Moxley back in 1975.
And then, in 2013, a judge released Michael Skakel on appeal after he served 11 and a half years in state prison. For the media, it was anything but an exoneration, but rather the kind of clever legal maneuver only accessible to super wealthy, free on a technicality. A famous
Information discussed in this podcast may be sensitive in nature to some listeners. Listener discretion is one person to share and for their families may be deleted. This is an independent production. There is no fancy editing and therefore may not be the production some are looking for. Just remember, it takes one person to share information to the right person, and a cold case just might get solved. Walker was a boy with the biggest smile when he was happy. His green eyes would light up, and his smile would make everyone around him smile. The problem was, Jalek wasn't always happy. He was born into a troubled home, to a drug-addicted mother, and would end up in several foster homes during his early years. Jalek, at age 7, would be eventually adopted by his foster parents, and he would gain 5 brothers and sisters. With Jalek's troubled birth and younger years, he struggled with some behavioral and emotional issues. He was considered a special needs adoption. In 2007, his foster parents said they were having severe troubles with him at home, and they wanted to put Jalik back in the care of the state. Instead, it was suggested that they try respite care. In late October, Jalik went to a respite care family for a few days. This was to give him a few days away from his family, give his family a break, and give Jalik a break. His father, adoptive father, would pick him up on November 1st. They went out to dinner, and then instead of going home, they went to spend the night at a vacant home the family owned.
This
When Jalik's father woke up the
was
next morning,
beautiful.
Jalik was gone, but he left behind a note that led his father to believe that he ran
His
away.
foster dad killed
The
him.
note
I
was
believe his
later
foster dad killed him.
proven to be written at a different time about something completely different. But the search for Jalik uncovered many troubles in his adopted family's home, and their behavior afterwards was quite suspect. Eventually, they left the state of New York and moved to Vermont. Jalik remains missing to this day. Where is Jalik Rainwalker?
That's so sad. I'm gonna show him to y'all. Such a beautiful boy. Jalik Rainwater. He was so cute.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Where Are They podcast. This episode is covering the story of Jalik Rainwalker, a young boy who has been in my mind and in my heart since first covering his disappearance in 2021. The case deserves another look. We do have a little bit more information, and I really want to keep Jalik's story out there. Also, stay tuned after Jalik's story. I do have a case update for you on a case that we covered a few years ago as well. Now, let's jump right into the story of Jalik Rainwalker. Jalik Rainwalker was born on August 2nd, 1995 in Albany, New York. His mother was a struggling addict, and Jalik was born addicted to drugs. He would almost immediately be put in care of the state of New York and go on to live in several foster homes for the first few years of his life. Throughout his early childhood, Jalik lived in multiple foster homes across upstate New York. Accounts from caseworkers described him as bright, affectionate, and very creative, but one who also had emotional and behavioral challenges, likely stemming from his difficult birth and perhaps a lack of consistent caregivers in his most formative years. Despite all these moves, several foster parents later speak publicly about caring deeply for Jalik and wanting the best for him. Some said that he could be very loving and he was very eager to please, although others noted that he did also struggle with outbursts or impulsivity, which is typical for children who've experienced early neglect. One foster mother reportedly wanted to adopt him permanently, but was unable to because of changes in the foster care system and just the overall placement decisions made by the overseeing agency. When Jalik was around 7 years old, he was adopted by Stephen Kirk and Jocelyn McDonald, who lived in rural Washington County, New York, just on the outskirts of Greenwich. They were already caring for other children, both biological and adopted, and described themselves as having a structured, homeschool-based household. At the time of the adoption, they changed Jalik's given name to the name Jalik L. Rainwalker, with Rainwalker being chosen to reflect their spiritual and naturalistic beliefs. By age 12, Jalik was described as intelligent, imaginative, and very good with the younger kids. He really liked playing with the little kids, he often played chess with them, and he loved animals. But his adoptive parents told caseworkers that his behavior had become difficult to manage, too difficult. They arranged respite care. A respite care is temporary placement, which is meant to give the adoptive parents a break, as well as perhaps the child some time away. Generally, a child would go into respite care for maybe a couple of weeks. However, they were only able to find a previous foster home Jalik to stay for a few days. This seemed to be the best solution at the time. His prior foster family still cared for Jalik. They still loved Jalik, and it would help his current family with a much needed time apart. The respite caregiver said that while Jalik was with them, he was happy, he was helpful, he was calm, he showed absolutely no signs of distress, there were no outbursts, and he truly seemed to enjoy being around the other children in the home. He even liked to help out with the household tasks. They described him as sweet, affectionate, and eager to please, very different from the troubled image painted by his adoptive parents. Of course, this was a different situation for Jalik, and children behave differently in different situations. Perhaps Jalik just also needed a break from his adoptive family. With respite family having to go out of town, Stephen picked up Jalik after a few days in the afternoon of November 1st, 2007.
Our time is 6:15. She wants 15 more minutes.
Stephen Kerr, Jalik's adoptive father, picked him up from the respite home in Altamont, New York, around 4 p.m. Stephen told the caregiver that he and his wife had not yet decided whether Jalik would remain in their home permanently. The respite caregiver told Stephen that Jalik had done very well during the stay and he had not shown any behavioral issues at all. But Jalik told the respite family that he did not want to go home with Stephen. But they assured him that he had to and that he could come back and visit them in the future. Jalik and Stephen would go to Red Robin or some dinner that evening, and then instead of returning to the family's main home in rural Washington County, Stephen said that he and Jalik went to a vacant home in Greenwich, New York. Now, this was a home that was said to be owned by Stephen's parents. It was undergoing some renovation, and nobody was currently living there. Stephen said the reason for this was they wanted some one-on-one time with Jalik to talk about his behavior and the family's future and spend time together. Stephen would also later tell police they arrived in Greenwich in the evening, watched a movie, and went to bed around 10 o'clock p.m. The next morning, after Stephen woke up, he went to go peek in and check on Jalik. He thought he was sleeping in bed, so he went and took a shower. After, he went to go check on Jalik once more and wake him up for the day, but to his shock, Jalik wasn't there. Stephen said he did find a note near the bed, and the note read, quote, "Dear everybody, I'm sorry for everything. I won't be a bother anymore. Goodbye, Jalik." End quote. Stephen believed that Jalik had likely run away, and he called the local Greenwich Police Department to report him as missing. The search and investigation. Stephen Kerr called the police around 8:57 a.m. to report Jalik missing. He said he believed Jalik had run away, possibly trying to reach one of his previous foster families, maybe in the city of Albany. A search began immediately, on foot, by helicopter, canine units were brought in, but they found no scent trail outside the house. Police found this extremely odd, believing if Jalik had run away, there would be a scent to follow. So they checked in with all of his previous foster families, and none of them heard from Jalik either. So authorities really began to wonder about this note that Jalik allegedly left behind. They did have a handwriting analysis done on this note, and they believed that it was indeed written by Jalik. They could not say if it was written under duress, however. Now, one of his previous foster parents would come forward saying that she believed she had seen that note before. A note that Jalik had made to write as an apology to his family for his behavior, not as an indication that he was going to run away. Right off the bat, many people noted Stephen Kerr's odd behavior. He would laugh during interviews, he would mock reporters, and he would go on long tirades when being interviewed about topics other than Jalik. He didn't seem concerned at all, and his behavior was just overall weird. Jalik's mother, Jocelyn, was also acting strangely. She mostly tried to avoid the media and stay quiet, but she did publicly speak out a few times. She believed that the note that that Jaleel wrote was a suicide note, and he ran off to harm himself and possibly take his own life, a direct result of his mental struggles, at least according to Jocelyn. Stephen and Jocelyn were also both given polygraph tests. Stephen walked out in the middle of his, and the results of Jocelyn's were never made public. So law enforcement began a close look at the Foster family and discovered some very troubling things. First, the home they were living in was not in great condition. In fact, it did not have electricity, it did not have running water, it did not even have any indoor plumbing. All of the children slept in one room, and the family used an outhouse on the property. The children were being homeschooled, but there wasn't much evidence of their education. So many people began to wonder, how does a home like this become approved for foster care and eventually adoption?
Seriously.
Especially when we're talking about a special needs adoption. Did the state conduct home visits? It didn't really appear so. Meanwhile, with all this scrutiny on the family, they decided to abandon his home and move to Vermont. So early on, with their son missing, they packed up and left the state. There were also some conflicting stories and statements made by Stephen regarding the day Jaleel disappeared that caused them to look at him even closer, and what they learned was quite disturbing. Stephen's account the night of November 1st to November 2nd has changed over time and does not fully align with any of the physical or witness evidence that was gathered. First, he said that he and Jaleel slept in the vacant Hill Street house in Greenwich, and that Jaleel ran away overnight. But police found no evidence of this, and search dogs could not pick up Jaleel's scent outside the home. Stephen also told different people different times for when they went to bed and times when he noticed Jaleel was missing. Cell phone data from that night reportedly also placed his phone in a different location than he originally claimed. This was a huge development. Because of this, law enforcement began looking for surveillance video in the area where they believed his cell phone was. They were using cell phone ping data and learning that his cell phone was far away from the Hill Street house in Greenwich where he said he was. Now, what they found when they looked for surveillance video was actually incredibly disturbing and disheartening. Surveillance footage for the early morning hours of November 2nd, 2007 showed a gold-colored van matching the description of Stephen's vehicle driving along the Hudson River in South Detroit, New York. This is roughly an hour from Greenwich, where he stated that he and Jaleel were at. Now, these were in the wee hours of the morning. Nobody else was on the road except this man in this surveillance footage. It's kind of an industrial business area. No reason for him to be driving through there. And sure, it was just a van that resembled or looked like Stephen's, but his cell phone pings was also putting him there, or at least putting his cell phone there. So what was he doing there instead of back at the home on Hill Street in Greenwich with Jaleel, as he said he was? Stephen actually never provided a clear explanation for this movement, and the searches in that area became intense. Divers were brought in and cadaver dogs for multiple day searches, but there was no trace of Jaleel ever found. Now, the Hudson River is a large river, and in that area it's deep and slow moving, with strong currents and muddy, debris-filled sections, making any search recovery efforts extremely challenging. The Greenwich Police Department has consistently stated since 2008 that, quote, "We do not believe Jaleel Rainwalker ran away. We believe he met with foul play, and we believe that Stephen Kerr knows more than he has told us." End quote. Investigators have reiterated many times that Stephen Kerr remains their main person of interest and that they have never cleared him. Now, there were a few other oddities that would happen in the months and years after Jaleel vanished. A few months after Jaleel disappeared, some members of the media and even some investigators received a strange anonymous letter postmarked from Westchester County, New York. Now, the letter claimed, quote, "Jaleel still alive. Needed a foot soldier for this war on drugs. Picked him up, route 40, post 30. He's okay, no fake. He says, ask his mama, papa, who are the Macaroni family. My cat named Diamond. Why does Franti yell fire? Don't try to look. We are not there. End quote. Now, of course, was an odd note. No one was quite sure what to make of it. It did reference a roadside marker on Route 40, Post 30, which was fairly local, and it included odd, seemingly coded phrases like macaroni family, my cat named Diamond, Franti yell fire. The letter also claimed Jalek was alive and being used as a foot soldier in a war on drugs. None of this seemed to make any sense. To this day, none of this seemed to make any sense. And the author of the letter was never identified. Jalek's adopted grandmother, Barbara Reilly, has also spoken up publicly that she too believes her daughter Jocelyn and Stephen know more than they are saying, and she is very fearful that they did something to Jalek.
Wow.
She has fought for Jalek since day one and is completely heartbroken over his disappearance. In 2008, the year following Jalek's disappearance, Barbara went inside the now vacant home in which Stephen, Jocelyn, and their children had lived in. In a heart-wrenching discovery, she found a yellow fleece jacket that Stephen had said Jalek was wearing when he was last seen, and Stephen had said he believed Jalek was wearing that jacket when he left. He had had it on the night before, and when he woke up the morning and found Jalek missing, so was that yellow fleece jacket. Yet, Barbara found it laying in the corner of the abandoned home in Washington County. Now, Barbara already believed they had done something bad to Jalek, but this just confirmed it for her. But in a sad twist, Barbara turned over the jacket to authorities and was charged with trespassing for entering that home illegally. Barbara has not backed down, however. She helped organize community searches in and around Greenwich, Cambridge, and Troy, often leading those volunteer searches herself. Police, volunteers, and dogs searched the Hill Street home, the Batten Kill River, and multiple fields and wooded lots around Greenwich. They also focused on the Hudson River near South Troy after that van sighting. But despite extensive searches, no trace of Jalek, no clothing, no personal items, no remains has ever been found. Greenwich, New York. Greenwich is a small rural village in Washington County in the upper Hudson Valley, roughly about 45 minutes northeast of Albany. The area is surrounded by wooded hills, farmland, and winding rural roads, with the Batten River running nearby. The neighborhood on Hill Street, where Stephen and Jalek allegedly went to spend the night, is quiet and sparsely populated. It has a mix of older homes and open fields. Now, the Hill Street property was his second home owned by Stephen's family. It was unoccupied and was partly under renovation at this time. Hill Street sits just a few blocks from Main Street, the small downtown area of Greenwich. Beyond that, the land turned quickly rural and heavily wooded. The Batten River is a tributary of the larger Hudson River, and it was one of the first places searched by police and volunteers. Later, attention turned to other waterways and back roads in Washington County. The main route through town is State Route 29, which connects Greenwich to nearby towns like Cambridge and Salem. To the west, Route 29 links to Route 40 and eventually to Troy, New York, where that gold-colored van matching Stevens was reportedly seen on camera near the Hudson River in those early morning hours. These roads lead to remote, wooded areas, river access points, all areas which police and volunteers have searched repeatedly. The area specifically where the van was seen driving is right near river access points and industrial lots along the Hudson River's western bank. It's a quiet, dark, semi-industrial zone at night, very limited traffic, and it does have several boat launches and dumping areas. Additional leads and developments in the case. As years went by, the case continued to be considered an active case, never truly went cold, not according to authorities. It seemed that everyone, including those who knew Jaliek personally, and even community members who had never met Jaliek, wanted to find this boy. No one wanted to give up on searching for him. And leads continually came in. Most would amount to nothing, but there would be a few important developments in the case after the 2007 disappearance. Let's talk about a few of those milestones. In 2012, the case was officially reclassified as a presumed homicide. This would bring in different detectives and give different tools and resources to the officers working in the case. In 2022, the New York State Police conducted a very thorough search of a wooded area in South Troy after receiving a very credible tip. In 2023, State Police came in to search another wooded area near the South Troy Dodgers baseball field near South Troy. This was again based on yet another credible tip. In July of 2023, a memorial bench was installed in Gannon Park in Greenwich to honor Jaliek's memory and to keep public awareness alive. The most recent major news in Jaliek's case would come about in October of 2024. Skeletal human remains of a non-adult individual were discovered in a wooded area near Burden Pond Preserve in South Troy. South Troy, of course, being a location that is often associated with Jaliek and his disappearance. Everyone was hopeful and fearful that this was Jaliek. Shortly thereafter, however, investigators announced via a dental comparison that the remains were not those of Jaliek Rainwalker. Family and advocates continue to push forward for information, for new leads, for public awareness. His adoptive grandmother, Barbara, is still quoted as saying she is still waiting for word and she still hopes for closure. There have been a couple of documentaries featuring Jaliek's case over the years. Vanished, the Missing Persons Project. There is an episode that features Jaliek's disappearance. It is in season 1, episode 1. Never Seen Again, a documentary on Paramount Plus, includes an episode titled Jaliek Rainwalker Promised a Forever Home.
That's so fucking sad.
Child Protective Services failures. Jaliek's case brought forth many issues within the Child Protective Services Agency, the agency which placed Jaliek with Stephen Kerr and Jocelyn McDonald. First, it was noted that Jaliek had been in many foster homes, being bounced around quite a bit before eventually being placed with Stephen and Jocelyn. Second, many questioned the living conditions of the home that the family was living in and how they were able to be approved to be foster parents and ultimately adoptive parents of a special needs child. Then it was also learned that despite claims that Jaliek had many emotional and behavioral issues, he was not receiving any care or therapy for that. Was that not a condition of his foster placement? It appeared it was not. In fact, there wasn't any record of his mental health treatment or protection/foster care system every year in the United States. And many of those disappearances are actually underreported, meaning there could be much.
I don't know what that cat was doing. Hi, Meg.
State-level audits show that in many cases, state agencies are not even properly reporting missing foster children to the national databases. For example, a sample in one audit showed that 45 out of 100 missing child episodes were never reported to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, as they are required to do by federal law. That's almost half. Now, there are many other children from the foster care system across the country who have disappeared or vanished and remain missing to this day. We've covered a few of these cases. Oakley Carlson was a young girl from Oakville, Washington, who vanished under very troubling circumstances.
It's going to be warm today.
Oakley was born December 6, 2016, and was first removed from her biological parents' care as an infant due to neglect and substance abuse.
You still gotta go to school.
Oakley spent more than 2 years thriving with her foster parents, Jamie, Joe, and Eric, who
That's a
described her
warm
as
day. You
bright,
can wear your
affectionate,
dress if
full
you
of
want.
life. They loved her. Despite their concerns about her safety,
Any of them.
Washington's Department of Children, Youth, and Families, DCYF, returned Oakley to her biological parents, Jordan Bowers and Andrew
6:20, babe.
in late 2019. Of course, Jamie, Joe, and Eric were devastated. And by early 2021, Oakley had vanished.
What,
Her
baby?
last confirmed sighting was on February 10th, 2021.
You have to go to school,
But
babe.
she was not reported missing until December of 2021, nearly 10 months later, after a welfare check raised alarms. When questioned, Oakley's parents gave inconsistent statements about her whereabouts. They would be arrested on unrelated child endangerment charges, but never charged directly in the disappearance of Oakley. Searches of their home revealed evidence suggesting neglect, and reports emerged that Oakley may have been locked in a small room or confined in very unsafe conditions right before she vanished. Despite extensive searches, no trace of Oakley has ever been found. Oakley's case does remain open and active, with her foster family and the community continuing to demand justice. It is feared the worst in Oakley's case, however, since one of her siblings came forward and told authorities that her parents had told her that Oakley had ran off into the woods and was eaten by wolves. Adam Herman's case is one of the most haunting child welfare tragedies in the United States. This is a story of a young boy who disappeared while under adoptive care, but whose absence went unnoticed for nearly a decade. Adam was born in 1976 in Kansas and entered the foster care system as a child after reports of neglect. When he was about 2 years old, he was placed with Doug and Valerie Herman, who later adopted him. Early reports would describe Adam as a quiet, sensitive boy who loved animals and had a kind heart. But behind closed doors, his life became one of alleged abuse and isolation. It would be around 1988-1989, when Adam was 11 years old, that it is believed he vanished from the Herman household in Towanda, Kansas. His adoptive parents never reported him missing.
6:23,
Instead, they
Maisie.
continued to collect government adoption subsidy payments for him for more than 10 years. Adam's disappearance actually remained a secret until 2008, when one of his biological siblings, now an adult, came forward to authorities and revealed that Adam had not been seen in years. A police investigation that followed uncovered disturbing allegations that Adam had been severely abused and possibly killed, and that his remains may have been hidden. Extensive searches were conducted on the former Herman property, but his body was never found. In 2010, Doug and Valerie were convicted of theft and fraud for receiving those adoption payments after Adam's disappearance. They were never charged with his murder due to lack of physical evidence. They simply claim that Adam ran away, and they just never thought to report it. Adam's case exposed deep flaws in the state of Kansas child welfare monitoring system, particularly its failure to follow up on adoptive placements. Harmony Montgomery's case is one of the most heartbreaking and a high-profile example of a child who vanished while in state custody. Harmony was born June of 2014 in Massachusetts. She entered the foster care system as a toddler because of her parents' struggles with addiction and instability. After several years in foster care,
You don't want to
a
wear a dress.
Massachusetts court granted custody to her biological father,
I'm just
Adam
asking
Montgomery,
so I know
in
what to
February
look
of
for.
2019, despite many warnings from child welfare workers and Harmony's mother, Crystal Sorey, that the home was unsafe.
Pants and a
Adam
t-shirt.
had a lengthy criminal record and a history of violence, including domestic abuse. By late 2019, Harmony had vanished.
Okay.
Family members later told police they had not
have a
seen
lot of
the
those,
then
so
5-year-old since November or December of
You
2019,
can wear
but
any
her
pants. You
disappearance
don't
was
have to be
actually
that
not
much.
reported until late 2021, when Harmony's biological mother, Crystal, who had been trying to contact her daughter for months, finally alerted authorities. In fact, She said she had been trying to alert authorities over the 2 years that she couldn't track down her daughter, but nobody would
Let's
listen
go
to her.
find what you're gonna wear.
When police finally did check on the family in Manchester, New Hampshire, Harmony was nowhere to be found.
Go find a
The
pair and
search
ask
that
her if you can
followed
wear them.
revealed evidence of severe abuse and neglect, and in 2022, Adam Montgomery was arrested on charges that included second-degree assault, child endangerment, and welfare fraud. Another sad example of a parent who continued to receive benefits on their child's behalf after they were gone. His wife, Kayla Montgomery, also faced related charges and later cooperated with investigators. In 2023, police publicly announced that they were treating the case as a homicide investigation, believing that Harmony was killed in December of 2019. The details that would come out in the trial were horrific. In February of 2024, Adam Montgomery was convicted of second-degree murder in Harmony's death and sentenced to 56 years to life in prison. Despite extensive searches, Harmony's body has never been found. And there's more, too. There's the story of Ayla Reynolds, the story of Patrick Alford, and Angel Overstreet. Angel's father is currently awaiting trial accused of her murder, but Angel has never been found. And I'm sure there are others, too. So what do we do about this? How do we reform the system to better protect our children? Or do you think that these are unavoidable tragedies and stories that would likely happen regardless? Jaliek Rainwalker never really truly seemed to have a fair chance in life. This poor boy had struggles from birth. And those struggles followed him through childhood. What do you think happened to Jaliek Rainwalker? Jaliek is described as biracial with light brown skin, curly hair, and bright green eyes that many describe as expressive and thoughtful. At the time of his disappearance in 2007, he was about 5 feet tall and weighed around 105 pounds. He was last seen wearing a yellow fleece pullover that has since been found, a gray t-shirt with a dragon on it, blue jeans, and black canvas high-top sneakers. Anyone with any information regarding Jaliek Rainwalker is asked to please contact the Greenwich Police Department at 518-692-2112. Thank you so much for listening to Jaliek's story today. His story is one I think about often, and I continue to hope for a break in this case every day. Jaliek deserved so much better.
We went shopping, school clothes shopping, you loved them.
A shout out to some sources used in gathering information for this episode.
What about these?
The Center for the Rights of Abused Children, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, known as NCMEC, Times Union out of Albany, New York, and the Daily Gazette out of Schenectady, New York. Make sure you visit our website, wherearetheypodcast.com, sign up for our blog releases. We will link all of these sources in the blog post for Jaliek's story. We'll also post pictures. Thank you again for being here, for listening to Jaliek's episode, and for helping us get his story out there. Watching and following the trial of Reginald Robertson. This was the man charged with the murder of Tiffany Foster, or Tiffany Starks, as she is sometimes known. Now, Tiffany's remains have never been found, so this was a no-body homicide case in the state of Georgia. But after a couple weeks at trial, a jury found the defendant guilty, and he was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Tiffany, aged 35,